All right. Well, very glad I got a chance to learn more about that group, more about Perfume, and wish them luck in the future. But for now, let's transition over to the group I picked. I picked INXS, and if you didn't catch it earlier, it's INXS. So, they still exist sort of today. We'll get into that as time goes on, but basically, it started off as a group of 6 guys from Australia. 3 of them are brothers, and that was sort of led to the original name of the band, which was the Ferris Brothers Band. The 3 Ferris brothers who were in the band were Andrew, Tim, and John Ferris. And the other 3 members of the band were Kirk Pengilly, Gary Beers. He does have, I'd have to look it up. I think one has 2 R's and one has 1, and I think it's 1 R, 2 R, Beers is his name. And then the original lead singer, Michael Hutchence, and they eventually all wound up getting together and forming this band. Now, I should point out that they're an 80s rock group, and some of the details of their story are not age-appropriate for this discussion, so I'll be leaving some of those out. A lot of this information comes from their autobiography called Story to Story, which is not safe for kids, to be brutally honest there. But I will be toning things down a bit to sort of fit our target demographic, I guess you could say, with this podcast. But in any case, they eventually changed their name to INXS, which is sort of a takeoff on another band, which is XTC. Pronounced ecstasy, and that's the sort of the genesis of the INXS name. They wanted something short, and then that was sort of how they arrived at that. Now, if I were to describe their genre, they're obviously a rock band. They, especially early in their career, were what would be typified as a new wave band. New wave was this thing that sort of came out towards the end of the disco era and into the early 80s. That was sort of this synth-based thing that was, like I said, more rock-driven after disco sort of started to fade away as a popular type. But they did have a lot of dance influence in their music, which I guess is part of the reason why a lot of their songs that have a lot of official remixes that have been done over the years that they've contracted out for. If you want to take a look at that, you can go ahead and search INXS remixes, and you'll find some pretty neat stuff, actually. People have gone in a lot of interesting different ways with their songs. But sort of what adds to their distinct sound as a group is really a couple things. First of all, Kirk Pengilly, in addition to doing the guitars on a lot of their songs, actually learned how to play the saxophone and I think 1 or 2 other instruments. Basically, they decided it was something they wanted for their sound, so he just took it upon himself to learn to play the instrument, which is actually pretty impressive. The other major part of their sound that you will hear in a lot of their songs, especially a lot of their very popular songs, is that they have a very heavy bass line in a lot of them. But anyway, as far as the sort of trajectory of their career, they started out with their first album in Australia in 1979. It was self-titled. And then they had Underneath the Colours, and of course that's with a U because they're from Australia. And after that, they started to sort of, move internationally and do some of that stuff. So their first album that had any sort of international success was Shabu Shuba. I think I said that right. It's got really 2 songs there that were decently well known. One of those is called The One Thing, which the music video is a little PG-ish, but it may inform you as to why cat videos are so popular now. Just to put it that way. It's certainly not the first example of what we would call now a cat video, but there are a lot of cats in that music video for whatever reason. The other one that wasn't necessarily such a huge radio hit, but has an absolutely huge longevity within the fandom of the group is Don't Change. It was filmed at a hangar somewhere, I believe, in Australia. It's got all the members of the band, for the music video at least. And they play it at the end of virtually all their concerts. You'll see it there. It's just one of those songs that's, I think the phrase they use is never died with INXS. So it's one of those ones that they put at the end there. After that, they went through a few more albums. Let's see, The Swing. Listen Like Thieves was one of their first big ones in the United States. That has one of their big hits, What You Need. And right after that, the album after that was Kick, which is their most popular album. That was released in 1987. And then there's X in 1990. Let's see, Welcome to Wherever You Are. Let's see, Full Moon Dirty Hearts, Elegantly Wasted. And then there's a big gap because, unfortunately, some stuff went down there. So they had their peak in the late 80s, really, with the Kick album. And they did X, which was an okay follow-up. And they ran into some publicity issues and variety of things. And unfortunately, it eventually ended with the last album with the original band members was Elegantly Wasted in 1997. And later that year, the lead singer, Michael Hutchence, was found dead in his hotel room. I'm sorry, there's really not a nice way to say this. It was ruled a suicide. And after that, they were kind of out of commission for a few years. And, obviously, if you're asking, well, why didn't they ever do a Pokemon song? Is even if they had wanted to, the timing was just about as bad as you could hope for there. There might have been a good choice on Elegantly Wasted. I would recommend looking up the song Everything, which actually has like a full music video. A couple of the songs in the album have full music videos that were shot before Michael died and just weren't released until much later because of all that stuff. And so, the band was not really in the position to, if they had been asked and had wanted to, produce anything. I don't suspect that the band members themselves had too much personal familiarity. They might have, if they had visited Japan, say 96 or 97, maybe they picked something up. But they did have kids who were born in the late 80s, early 90s. So I would assume that if they had any exposure to the franchise, it would probably be through that. So it was just one of those things that obviously just wasn't meant to be. And to be fair, the other members of the group had also been going through some stuff. Some of their parents had been passing away around that time. And once Michael passed away in 97, it just really shut them down for a while. And they went into sort of this period of mostly inactivity. They did perform at the dedication ceremony for the Sydney Stadium for the Olympics. I don't think they were in the actual opening ceremonies, but they did perform at the dedication for stadium. And they did tried a variety of replacement lead singers. They tried doing it with just the 5 of them. And eventually that led to something that I'm sure a lot of you have some memories of. Back in 2005, they had a reality show called Rockstar INXS, where they did this basically worldwide talent search, at least pretty much through all the English-speaking world, to try and find a new lead singer. And kind of a sad fact, I did actually consider trying out for that show as a fan of the group, but I kind of realized I didn't really have the talent and probably wasn't the kind of person they were looking for. And I just barely made the age requirement for the show. But there's a little, I guess, secret shame? I don't know. I did want to kind of throw that in there as the one reality show I have ever seriously considered trying out for. But in any case, they sort of, during the summer of 2005 and into the early fall, they had a series of episodes, and they eventually narrowed it down to a couple folks, eventually winding up with a man by the name of J.D. Fortune, who was, he's originally from Canada, and talking about determination, he had been actually kind of homeless, more or less. I think he'd been drifting around before this show, and was living out of his car, and made it all the way in there. Now, kind of sadly, it wasn't really meant to be. First of all, a couple years after that show, there was one of the band members had a medical problem that prevented them from playing a large number of shows in a row because of some issue with their hands or whatever. And so medically, they couldn't really do a long tour. And Fortune had some, shall we say, personal issues. We won't go into too deep of a detail here. And so the band sort of became inactive after about 2007, kind of sadly. They've put out a few things. They did a reimagining album. And they've tried a few other folks since then. They'll occasionally do shows, I guess, at events or maybe on TV or stuff like that. And that's sort of the loose history of the band. So basically, to sum it up, the main reason they never did a Pokemon song is that during that time, Even if they had wanted to use one of the songs from, say, Elegantly Wasted, it would have been really difficult logistically because after Michael died, there were all these legal fights over his estate, and Michael was the primary lyricist for the group, and that's just basically the reason it never happened. Like I said, they have kids who are about the right age, so I'm sure they've heard of it, and maybe bought some stuff for their kids. But that's sort of the history of the group from the late 70s up through today. So you may be wondering, where did I hear about them? Well, it's kind of a weird story because I really got into their music starting in college. Like my first semester of college, they had just released a compilation album. This would be in 2002. And I picked that up, and it took me a long time to figure out where I had heard their music. Now, you may remember that I said that their biggest album was Kick back in 1987. Well, the singles for that album came out from 88, 89, and then their next album, X, came out in 90, and that was pretty much their second biggest album, other than maybe, like I said, Listen Like Thieves. And during that time period, I was about 5 or 6, and I do know that every other week, the daycare I went to would take us to the roller rink. And, they would play music there, and there are certain INXS songs that wouldn't be appropriate for a young daycare audience, but some of them would, at least by late 80s standards, be just fine. And I have to figure I must have heard some of their stuff there, along with, the usual suspects, Paula Abdul, Vanilla Ice, other, plenty of Michael Jackson, of course. I do also remember hearing this very strange version of Beat It, but all the lyrics were about food. So I'm pretty sure that's the first place I heard Weird Al, at least that I remember. So that was sort of my formative musical experience, was sort of in the late 80s, 88 to about 90. And so that was the period of time where they were the most popular. Now, Anne, as I understand, you didn't really have too much of a familiarity. You were born a couple years later than I was. Isn't that right? And you don't really remember their show either.
No, and some of it could be like my small town of Canada. Maybe they didn't get a lot of radio play, and then, I didn't have cable, and then when I got to college, I still didn't have cable. It could have been just the stars didn't align, but, I never really came across them until we started this project.
Yeah, even when their new lead singer was a Canadian, you didn't...
Well, he left us, man. He's dead to us.
Aww.
Joined the Americans. But for some reason, it could just be, again, my personal circumstances. I did not encounter a lot of staples of pop culture until, my later college years when I, started getting the internet. It's some things just did not cross my path in the right way. So it could be that they, unfortunately, just never hit the right wavelength for me to get to find them. That's
possible. I think the other times I'd heard of them before college, I think one of their music videos called Beautiful Girl addresses some really, dark is one way of putting it, but it deals with body image a lot. It talks about anorexia in the video. The song itself doesn't really explicitly reference any of that, but they do talk about that. And I think it was mentioned on a Nick News special that I saw on eating disorders back in the 90s. And I probably heard the news story of when Michael died. I, to be honest, would not have had nice things to say about it back then. I think maybe I'm a little more politically correct now. It was very tragic, and if you want all the gory details, you can look them up. But, so that's sort of was my introduction to it. Before we get on to the songs, there are a couple other things I kind of wanted to mention in regards to INXS and Pokemon, even though they've never done a song for it for kind of, like I said, chronological reasons I sort of explained there. There are a couple things. First of all, I think that the whole Rockstar INXS experience and them going from one lead singer to another probably is one of the reasons why I'm not as bothered by the voice actor switch in the dub. And because when they announced this, I had just been through Rockstar INXS, this again. It's something I had just kind of been through, so it maybe didn't bother me as much. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it could be if you'd learned to deal with it quicker than some of the rest of us did.
Or the fact that I was a little bit older, maybe that helped too. The other Well, there were a couple there. One really weird similarity I wanted to point out is that Pokemon obviously started as a video game series. It turns out INXS had their own video game. And I don't mean they had a track in Guitar Hero or a song in a Grand Theft Auto game. They had a video game on the Sega CD based on a couple of the songs from their Welcome to Wherever You Are album. And it's one of the Make My Video games. It's not very good, but it does compare on a certain level to Pokemon Channel for the GameCube, and I kind of wanted to mention that. In that both games have limited interactivity, and you watch a lot of pre-recorded video footage. So there's a kind of a weird similarity there. And there is one Pokemon song that I'd say kind of does sound like an INXS song, and that's from, on the Japanese side, from the 4th generation Kaze no Message of the Wind. It has that aggressive bass line in places, which is very similar to some of INXS's stuff, particularly I would say on the album Kick, which we'll be talking about a little bit today. And maybe that's one of the reasons I really like that. It's one of my favorite Japanese songs ever. And I'd also have to say that at the very end of the song, Kaze no Message, there's this riff that bears a very loose, they don't sound exactly the same by any means, but very loose resemblance to the main riff from one of INXS's biggest hits, Devil Inside. It's in a different key because the songs are in very different keys, but there are like a handful of notes in there that sound kind of similar, and I'm wondering if the people who composed that, I think it's a group called the Sky Boys, did either the composition or arrangement or something. I wonder if they consider INXS an influence, because INXS did have a bit of a fan base in Japan. They shot at least one of their music videos, Original Sin, in Tokyo, which is a pretty neat music video if you want to look that one up. But they did do some concerts there and some events, and they kind of remarked, I think in one interview I saw, that the folks in Japan were just very polite, and they would clap after each song and wait for the next one, which was very different from their audiences in a lot of other countries. So, but anyway, the 3 songs of theirs that I picked, they have obviously a large number of albums over the years, are This Time from the Listen Like Thieves album, which was released in 1985, Kick from the album of the same name from 87, and way forward, the album they released after Rockstar INXS, Switch, has a song called Us, which I also picked. Let's go in chronological order from when these were released. So the first one is This Time off the Listen Like Thieves album. So if you listen to the lyrics of this, it's pretty clear that the song is sort of about a bickering couple. That aside, given the tone of the song and stuff, I think this would work really well as a song about the sort of first generation traveling group, which, Anne, in many times in the podcast, you've mentioned that these 3 folks really don't have much of an excuse to be with each other. They aren't really compatible in any sort of meaningful way, I would say.
Yeah, basically.
And so if you listen to this song, it starts out with this little guitar melody that goes, and the lyrics start off, I will believe you if you say it's true. And there are a few lines that are more romantic, and maybe if we had the original Ash Misty Brock, we would have Brock sort of chime in unexpectedly for a couple of those lines to make it work a little bit better. But the chorus of the song basically says that they're hoping and praying that this time will be the last time that we will fight like this. And it sort of goes on into there, and it sort of talks about how the people involved are threatening sort of to leave each other and go off on their own, and yet they never do. And I think that sort of fits the group dynamic for the original series too, especially like the first pre-Orange Islands arc of it, where the characters are sort of tenuously linked and just sort of traveling because. And do you feel that's an apt comparison?
Yeah, this is a wonderful choice of yours. And I'm kind of really touched by one line in the song, like, that we're always wanting things we cannot find. You know that we're always wasting time. It kind of reminded me of Johto in that, like, the time where they suddenly realized they were friends and how to be good friends was the minute they left. All that time they were together almost was like wasted time. Like, there's something really touching and heartbreaking about that.
I kind of have to agree, and like I said, they do fight a lot. Now, I suppose the alternative perspective you could do for this song is you could make it about the Team Rocket trio, and maybe it works there in a slightly different way as well, between Jesse and James as sort of the main figures there. Actually, I would really love to have a version where James does the vocals. That might be very fun to listen to.
Eric Stewart does sing.
Any other thoughts on sort of the style of the song? It's definitely one of the more friendly is one way to describe it, I suppose, but definitely one of the more kind of upbeat, even though the topic is, like I said, is about a bickering couple and sort of working out their issues, but there's kind of hopeful for the future. Is that sort of the vibe you got from the song overall?
Yeah, like musically, it's not really playing against the lyrics in like a really extreme sense, but like it does have like just kind of a more positive feel to it, which I think kind of makes you feel like this is not a bickering couple song where they can't make it work and should break up. Like this is a couple that maybe can get it together towards the end. Like the feelings are positive as well.
And I should point out, this song has a music video. The other two songs don't. But this one has an official music video. It was one of their singles off of Listen Like Thieves. It features what I like to call the millionaire lights, because they use these, what at the time were very new computerized lights that are, move in precise timings and stuff like that, like you would see going like into a question in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So that's kind of where I got that comparison from. But it's pretty neat. It's not, I would say, their most visually impressive. INXS has definitely a reputation as a very music video adept band, and some of that was the fact that Australia, for a long time, just a lot of folks, even major acts, would rarely or never tour there, so they would send in music videos, which predate MTV by quite a bit, but that may have given Australian groups like INXS sort of a head start in figuring out what they wanted to do when MTV came around and when they could start doing their own music videos and do that, and that helped them get exposure, because certainly some of their songs got extra radio airplay and sales and stuff off some of the music videos. Definitely like The One Thing, What You Need, Need You Tonight. Those are some of their biggest, most well-known music videos out there. And like I said, this is maybe not their most important one. It was directed by two guys from the group 10cc, which some of you will know is the group that did I'm Not in Love, one of the songs that was later featured on the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack. A lot of INXS's other videos that are very memorable were directed by a man by the name of Richard Lowenstein. And he was considered like the seventh member of the band at one point, but he didn't direct this particular one. Any thoughts on the music video itself? Did you get a chance to look at that, Anne?
I think I didn't see the music video. I saw a live performance of theirs.
Yeah, they kept that in their concert repertoire for quite a while. It's definitely, if you look up there are a couple not nice words on that album, but I think it's called Live Baby Live. It's not Live Baby Live or Live Baby Live like in their New Sensation song. I think it is actually Live Baby Live is the name of their live album that was shot at Wembley Stadium in London. They have a live version of that, but they kept it in the repertoire for quite a while, I believe.
Yeah, they looked really fun. Have you ever gotten to see them live?
I actually did get to see them twice. I saw them once in, I believe, 2006 in Milwaukee at I believe it's the same place I saw the Milwaukee performance of Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions. And a year later, must have been one of their last shows because it was 2007, and I think not long after, one of their guys had that medical problem where he couldn't perform a bunch of shows in a row. And that was at Summerfest in Milwaukee. And I got to see that with my cousin Justin, who came up from the Chicago area to see that. So that I did get to see a couple of their concerts, but only after they had switched performers. I never really knew them that well as a band before Rockstar INXS, or really before I got into college, is when I started really looking into the band and sort of collecting their albums.
Yeah, they looked super fun.
Yeah, they are. Like I said, they're not role models by any stretch of the imagination, but they love performing. You have to give them credit for that.
Keep listening for more from this interview.